Hey everybody, this is Rattles. We're here on the porch with, as always, my favorite sister Heidi. And today we thought we would talk about why skeptics aren't the bad people and why debunking is a good thing. And I often have trouble sleeping, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I really don't want to hear about the economy all over again. So I tend to listen to some wild stuff, Sasquatch podcasts and things like that. And the hosts of them are always saying the same thing. They're always saying, well, I think science is a good thing. And I like to be, it's important to be skeptical, but you don't have to be a debunker. So we thought today we would talk about why debunking is not a bad thing and why skeptics aren't always the bad guys. So would you like to take a stab at that conversation, Heidi?
So something that you and I had talked about earlier was etymology of the word debunking. And we know what bunk is, and we don't want to have bunk in our thoughts or our life. And so debunking is just extracting bunk from our lives. So the word itself actually implies something good, but the connotation that comes with it nowadays is that debunking is a bad thing, especially in the realm of that edge between science and pseudoscience. Um, yeah. You want to say anything else about the debunking side of the equation?
Well, I was just thinking about, well, yeah, actually, the debunking part is important because suppose you do think there's a Sasquatch out there. It doesn't help you to learn about that Sasquatch if you don't first eliminate all the footprints that are hoaxes, all the hair that's just coyote hair, all the reports that are just people making something up to get on TV. All that's doing is contaminating the real evidence if there's real evidence. So you're not gonna meet your goal of learning about what Sasquatch is if you don't eliminate the stuff that's not Sasquatch. So I think that's important. And I was thinking about what your friend Ray used to say, that everybody thinks debunkers and skeptics are taking Santa Claus away and not giving him anything back.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing, but truth is actually probably equally valid, don't you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And all you're doing is replacing guesswork with, well, I almost don't want to say knowledge because
Yeah.
in science, we don't say we know very much. We say this is what the current evidence supports, and we can operate on that basis. But if new evidence comes in, yeah, but we're still basing it on reality.
Yeah. But in fact, I think a lot of people think of, actually, a lot of people use the word proof or prove. And in science, when it gets right down to it, no scientist, I don't think, would ever say that we have proven something with 100% certainty. And that's because with new technology, with new data, information that we feel like we know with a certain amount of certainty can change and it can be reinterpreted as new evidence comes in with new technology and so forth. And so saying that you've proven something is a rare, I'm going to say a rare thing in science rather than
Yeah.
than the way of science. Proving something isn't the goal of science. And in fact, when you're dealing with experimentation and sorting out, as Rattle said, the the point of it is to eliminate all of other possibilities in order that the one thing that's probably the truth is left remaining.
Yeah.
So that's when you're dealing with experiments, for example, that's what you're trying to do.
Well, and quantum theory's been around since the 20s, but quantum physicists and theoretical physicists still refer to it as the best supported theory that has ever happened in history. They don't say this is the absolute truth, even going back to the 20s. we're still saying this is the best supported theory we have.
Mhm. And we have one like that in psychology that gets cited a lot. I'm not gonna say it has that kind of evidence. But in psychology, lots of people like to talk about rewards and punishments. And in psychology, learning theory, that's a Skinnerian idea. And people can use it, but there's so many gaps in that theory that we know that it's not the ultimate one, but it's the best, one of the best that we have that's most organized and so forth. So it gets taught in classrooms with the caveat that in the future, these students who are in our classrooms will be working on developing a more thorough, better theory.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think another element that we talked about earlier is the sort of kind of along the same lines, but this the sort of misconception that people have about expertise. A lot of people spend a lot of time online studying a particular subject, um, and they start to consider themselves an expert on that subject, and they come up with all these new theories, and they bring those new theories out, and then they're very disappointed that mainstream scientists in that field don't take them seriously, and they don't understand why. So they'll ascribe that to arrogance or ignorance. Sometimes they just say, well, they're ignorant, or they don't want to allow for other things. Quite often, it's just that they're trying to solve a mystery that doesn't exist, because the answers to those questions have been well known to the experts in that field for years. So they're not taking it seriously because it's not relevant. And yeah, sorry, I'm completely losing my train of thought. That's not where I meant to go, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that works. And I think along on a related issue, scientists can be dismissive, and they can both be in the right and be dismissive. And I would argue that there is a certain amount of arrogance around university people. And I was raised in the university system, but I can still recognize arrogance. And I think when you're dealing with um, scientists and people who are enthusiastic about a fringe topic, I think there should be a burden on the scientist to speak in a way that will be helpful for other folks to understand what the scientific process is, how it works, and demonstrate how the people who have ideas or think that there's a mystery, how that's no longer a mystery. Show them the evidence. And the trick there is sometimes the scientists don't feel like it's worth their time because there are mysteries that they're trying to work on. So they don't want to dwell on this old one that's not a mystery. But from a community service, public education perspective, that really should be part of what their obligation is to society, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And getting teaching those people who are interested but still on the fringe, teaching them how to go about studying what they want to study. Jeff Meldrum was great for that. People would come to him and say, I want to study Sasquatch. How do I, what do I do? And he would tell them the same thing every time. He'd say, leave it as a hobby for now, go to university, get a degree in physical anthropology or any field that's relevant to that study, and make a name for yourself in that field and publish in that field. And only then do you come out and start studying the fringe, what seems to be the fringe element of it, but don't go into it looking to study that fringe. Learn first and then apply that knowledge to that other study.
And going off of that, in science, the most important discoveries, at least to my understanding, is at the fringes. So if you're in the mainstream thing, you're fine tuning what people know, but you're not making the huge discoveries. So huge discoveries are made on the fringe. And the trick is to sort out of that edge, that frontier, what are the things that have scientific evidence behind it, and what are the things that don't seem to, maybe yet because of technology or whatever. But
Right.
it's a funny, not a dilemma. I don't know what that is, but it's funny that you have to be operating on the fringe if you're making cutting edge discoveries
Yeah.
in science.
But that's
That's
why
a
you have to
funny,
debunk.
yeah, and that is exactly why you have to debunk. And
Asimov famously said that the greatest discoveries were never heralded with Eureka, but with, that's funny. I think he was right. You
yeah,
know, you
you're
don't
noticing
always
an
find,
oddity.
yeah, you find an oddity and you look at it and you see what's going on, and you don't make assumptions initially about what's going on. You go, that's funny. And then you figure out why, and what's causing it.
So in my classes, I always teach my students about rival hypotheses. And so when you see an object in the sky and you think, oh, it could be aliens, it could, but it
Hmm.
might be a satellite. It might be a, a reflection on your window. It might be a jet. It might be a weather balloon. It might be. And so the goal is to continue asking what it could be. And any one given person might not have the resources at the moment to rule everything out to the point where you can say, oh, I think it's an alien. So, um, yeah.
That kind of brings us to the most common argument for almost any fringe topic, which is the appeal to ignorance.
Which
Well,
is explained
yeah,
for the folks that aren't familiar with that.
yeah, which is, if you can't explain this, then my theory is right. If you
Yeah,
can't tell me what that light in the sky was, then it was a UFO and I'm right.
yeah.
If you can't tell me how that door shut, then it was a ghost, which
My
is
major professor,
kind of like saying, if you can't tell me how your computer works, then it's a whole bunch of hamsters running around inside and bringing index cards up and holding them up to the screen. Because most people can't tell you how their computer works,
yeah, yeah.
but it doesn't mean it's hamsters.
My major professor, Alan Gardner, would say, just because I'm not creative enough to come up with the correct answer doesn't mean that you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
And that
yeah,
is, I think, the most common thing that I hear from people who are sort of on the edge of things and saying, well, they're not experts in the field, but they think they're using the scientific method and they're not. That's
mhm,
the most common thing. It's like, well, I'm skeptical, but I couldn't explain it. We tried to debunk it and we couldn't. That
yeah,
doesn't mean it was magic.
right,
That means that you couldn't figure out what caused it. And yeah, and that's a dangerous trap to get into.
yeah. Something else that kind of distinguishes science from the sort of the pseudoscientific side of things is comfort level with uncertainty. And
Yes.
scientists are perfectly comfortable, I will say scientists generally are perfectly comfortable saying, I don't know. This is my best guess, but I don't know. Sometimes it will just be, I don't know. There isn't enough information about it. I don't know. And they can sleep at night with them. And a lot of folks on the pseudoscience side of the equation sometimes just need an answer.
The
And
God in the gap.
yeah, and so I think that's something that it is okay. And the more comfortable you can be with an I don't know answer, the less likely you are to fall for pseudoscientific scams and that argument that nobody else has been able to explain this, and so I must be right.
Yeah.
So
But Where was I going? I was about to say something. I was gonna say, if nobody else can explain it, then maybe, and you're really interested in it, maybe you need to get a degree and study that and figure it out.
Bingo. Bingo. Yeah.
That's, or find out if really nobody has ever been able to explain it. Because you hear a lot of things, well, nobody has ever been able to explain this, and sometimes you hear that and you go, well, I can explain it. There's nothing weird about that. But that's the other thing, is a lot of people don't want it explained. If you fully debunk something and show that there's a perfectly reasonable, logical, science-based answer for what causes that, people usually get angry with you.
Well,
And
Ray told you because you're taking away Santa.
yeah, exactly. It's like there are things that used to be kind of mysterious that aren't anymore, but instead of going, well, that's cool that they found an explanation for that, let's go look at this thing that there's no explanation for. They're gonna cling like a barnacle to that mystery that once was but isn't anymore.
I've got a good example of that. So back in the 1990s, there was a technique that was literally the rage, called facilitated communication. And it was a alleged communication technique where an autistic person who was also nonverbal had a facilitator or a helper, and they would they would allegedly support their arm while the person typed. And in that, so we could spend an entire episode on it. But it turned out that the facilitator was actually controlling what the autistic person, was typing and communicating. And it was demonstrated with as close to 100% certainty as I've seen anything in science that I've looked at. And yet, after it was debunked, after it was demonstrated scientifically that this technique was not only was it not the autistic person, but it was the facilitator doing it. So programs were shut down, but then people just held on to it, some people, and took it over, rebranded it under a different name, and it's still being used today in small groups around the country. And so if you look in the news,
none of them can explain how this person who's never been exposed to reading and writing and was believed originally to not be able to communicate is suddenly able to read and write fluently.
They do. They actually do have an explanation for that, but it's just that it's not true. Their explanation is that by simply being in the room where there's television around with Sesame Street and teachers teaching and so forth, they claim that it's essentially osmosis. They claim that they're savants, that they're actually savants rather than not savants.
Yeah.
So they have explanations. It's just that they're incorrect.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So we actually covered a lot of topics.
We did.
So we started with debunking and how skeptics aren't always the bad guy, and debunking is a good thing. Are there any points that we want to make about that topic, or?
Well, I think that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, is the benefits of being skeptical and debunking. And those benefits are that it's the difference between holding on to a faith in a theory, if you will, that you want to believe in, and finding out the reality. If I want to study a cryptid, for example, and some cryptids are animals that just haven't been named yet. The gorilla was a cryptid once. So is the billy ape. I want to know what it really is, and I want to know if it's really there, and facilitating my own belief in it is not the same thing as a real thing. It's a fantasy, and I want to know if I'm dealing with a fantasy or if I'm dealing with reality. And fantasy can be fun. I enjoy fantasy. but I want to know the difference, and I think the difference matters.
Yeah, I would argue. I think the difference matters as well. So I guess I'd like to hear from audience to see what they think. Does it matter to them?
Yeah, are we the bad guys?
Yeah,
Are we the bad guys?
I don't feel like a bad guy.
I don't feel like a bad guy
I want to be the
either.
bad guy.
Put
Actually,
it
I
in
don't
the
mind being the
comments if
bad
we're the
guy.
bad guys. All right.
Yeah. Um, okay, so as usual, if anybody has uh, ideas about topics, let us know. We're
Yeah,
interested in
those
what
down there
people
too.
want to talk about. And should we turn the light off?
I think it's getting dark. What time to turn the light on and head inside?
All righty. Well,
See
I'll
you
get
next
the
time,
light.
everybody.
See you later.